President Trump hailed ABC's move to indefinitely suspend Jimmy Kimmel's show, a move that some critics say pushes the United States away from democracy and closer to authoritarianism. Joining us now, the CEO of the Institute for Global Affairs, Mark Hannah. He's also the creator and host of the foreign policy podcast, None of the Above. Mark, really good to have you.
Thank you, Katie.
Okay, so where are you on the pushing us away from democracy and closer to authoritarianism timeline?
Yeah, it's hard to keep track. There are all these different milestones on that timeline, and, is that necessarily our destination? Who knows? But it is interesting to see with the news of Charlie Kirk's firing, with the news of Jimmy Kimmel's firing, it's exactly those countries that we are typically lecturing about freedom of the press, freedom of expression, that are now in a position with some, smirking to be lecturing us about that. And, we just saw Germany's journalists union coming out talking about the coercive power of the federal government and the Trump administration here. It does make us wonder whether the moral example and the political power that comes with America's kind of democratic example is fading. So
J.D. Vance, just a few months ago, was in Germany speaking at the Security Forum, and he, instead of talking about our collective security in NATO and the alliance and why we are so in need of it, which is what we usually do when we go to these things, he went there and he criticized Germany and he criticized Europe for not being open to free speech, for cracking down on it. And he was talking specifically about the right-wing voices that were out there, trying to silence them. It feels a bit hypocritical.
Absolutely, yeah. We in the United States, J.D. Vance in the vice presidency, is doing exactly what he critiqued Germany for doing, right? He's going after left-wing voices more than right-wing voices. But, when he said those things, it resonated for me because the European model of free expression isn't as libertarian and sort of uninhibited and wild as the American model. And I do think it's ripe for critique. I do think it's ripe for criticism. And I didn't necessarily disagree with J.D. Vance about a lot of what he was saying. But then when he's using the power of the FCC, a federal government agency that grants licenses, when he's using the power of the federal, of the Department of Justice to coerce media companies that should have free range to operate, it does smack of hypocrisy.
So when we look at this and we look at where we are in the timeline, I know it's hard to tell. We're in the fog of it all. There have been comparisons to Hungary and to Turkey, comparisons about how free speech was cracked down on, comparisons about how media was strong-armed, how friendly, very rich people, billionaires, would buy media companies, and then slowly, before they quickly aligned them to the political viewpoint of those in power. Do you see a parallel to what's happening here compared to what's happening there?
With the merger and acquisition of CBS News by, friendly voices close to Trump. Now, I have to be...
We don't know what they're going to do.
And it's really important to be careful and empirical here, right? Like, there is no clear line behind what, Brendan Carr at the FCC said. There's no smoking gun to show that that's exactly what Disney or ABC was thinking about when they pulled Jimmy Kimmel. If that did appear, if there was evidence of that, that would be damning. That would be a violation of press freedom in this country. So we have to be really careful when we start analogizing. But this does look very familiar to publics in those countries. They see, there's a lot of critique on the left in the United States about the corporate influence of media, the commercial imperatives of media, right? And those are fair. But one thing that guards against is too much government interference. If you have powerful media companies that are able to defend themselves with expensive lawyers and other things against government interference, that's a good thing, right? Once we start tearing at that independent media, it might not be commercially independent, but it's independent politically. Once we start tearing that down, that starts to resemble, emerging democracies,
and as I was
fragile democracies.
Talking about with Dylan Byers a little bit earlier, I mean, it's a kind of a mess of our own making because we have, we've stopped watching broadcast news collectively as a country. We've stopped watching news networks. We've stopped reading newspapers en masse. We now go to our own specific silos. And what it's done is it's made all of these institutions much weaker, much less financially stable, and much less able to stand up to an incursion like this by somebody who wants to strong-arm media companies.
Yeah, and people who have very definite political opinions tend to go to, there's all sorts of research on partisan selective exposure and this kind of thing, but the place where people get political news a lot of the time, about foreign affairs even, there's great books on this, but are these comedy shows, right? They go to Colbert, they go to Jimmy Kimmel, people who aren't necessarily political animals, and they get drips and drabs of political news enough to be informed citizens and make informed and figure out which politicians align with their values. And so by taking away the people that have these mass audiences, by people who attract these mass audiences, you're doing a disservice to democracy. It's also a disservice to the value of satire. And Brendan Carr, the FCC chair, 3 years ago said this when Biden was in office: political satire is the oldest and most important form of speech. People in influential positions have always targeted it for censorship.
Yeah, and it's been said that a sign of a healthy democracy is whether there are late night shows that can criticize those in power.
How funny their comedians are.
Mark Hannah, really good to have you. Thank you so much. Coming up next, here we go again.